Well, good evening, and I extend a very warm welcome to you all. It's so great to see you here this evening. Such an important evening, and as Dan has said, this is the second of our series around that. But what this shows me is that there is a commitment in that partnership with college here, and so I thank you for that. I know that for some families it is difficult to get here, and so we'll begin. We are recording this session this evening, and it will be sent out to families around that. So you will get a copy of it, and then other families will be able to listen and hear about it. I guess what are we on about here at St Michael's? We're about improving outcomes for your sons and daughters, your children. And we know the research shows that when there is partnership and collaboration between home and school, that outcomes improve. And I spoke to the middle leaders this afternoon, and what is it that I want? And I know that everyone in this school shares the exact same thing, that we want our students that when they leave here, hopefully for all of this at the end of year 12, that one, they walk into the year 13, the pathway that they want to go into, so whether that be university, whether that be a traineeship, whatever that may be, that they do that. And then the second thing is that they also have that, distinct upper sort of hand against other students with that because of the education, the skills that they've had here. So, they have that advantage over their counterparts with that. And, I've shared this a couple of times, but when families are engaged with their children's learning, their outcomes improve by 19%. That's what the research shows us. And so, the fact that you're here, fantastic, great things happening for your young people. As Jan has mentioned, a key priority for us this year is around that family and community engagement, particularly around learning, and hence the launch of these series this year. The purpose of this evening is for us to work in partnership together. So there is what is happening here at school, but then also you having the tools and I guess the knowledge of how you can support it by, because I know families absolutely want to do that. So, we know that numeracy and literacy is imperative for any person in today's day and age. And so, we want to ensure that our students are numeratically read. And so on this evening we'll be, I guess going through a little bit around, having a bit more of an understanding around numeracy, literacy and what that means for the young people, but also importantly those practical strategies of how you can support that at home. So you are very welcome here. Thank you for being here, and certainly I will hang around here at the end. If anyone wants to come and ask me further questions, have a chat about anything, I absolutely welcome that. So without further ado, I will hand over to Ron Hatton, the head of our inclusive education team. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't even use my iPhone tonight because I'm coming from a dental procedure and I'm very hard to swallow at that time, so we'll see how it goes tonight. I'm just going to reiterate the point that many people don't want to make commitments to be here tonight, so very much thank you for attending. And then also if it was who will be watching this recording, I hope it will be beneficial. It's not my role as being in English education. I've been an English teacher for all of my career. So I'm close to 15 years now of being in education. Worked across different sectors, worked across prep to 12, to senior English, and I've met many families here and done a lot of work working with families, and I've also been looking at the literacy and numeracy side of things. So today I hope it will be beneficial to you when doing some practical things within the home environment. To begin with, and this is going to be a bit challenging for some of us, maybe you haven't had an opportunity to meet some people in the room, but we're going to go with our first topic in terms of reading habits. So with the people around you or in close proximity to you is a bit of an icebreaker. So I've got these questions up on the board, and we're just going to have a bit of a chat for 2 minutes and see what your experiences are with reading. If you're watching the recording, maybe you're going to do more of a personal reflection on these. So turning to the person near you and having a chat, introduce yourselves, and then have a go through this experience. And with some of these questions can be a bit daunting. As adults, we can find it very challenging to find time to read at night, particularly with that first question. But for me, growing up, it was, I'm trying to use these questions to follow my own experiences when it came to reading. And the fourth question there, can you recall any pleasant experiences when you read as a child, is I really remember my grandparents reading. My dad, I can't really recall a time where he did read to me. The thing about that memory, the absence of my father reading, wasn't because he didn't want to. For him, he came from the era, and this is what's been told to me, is that he went through the education system where there was more ownership of parents, and they came to a more affordability issue. So he had 2 older brothers, and then they got to go to high school. He finished school when he got to primary school. So he never learnt, got that part of that education, and he went straight to working. And so it was a different era back then. And he taught himself how to read, he taught himself how to write. And for me, is that he didn't have too much of a role in my education growing up. Certainly he was present, but didn't have too much of a role there. My mum, on the other hand, was the main person who was driving me towards getting better and doing the best I could in terms of education. So, my memories are more, for me, it's different. I was a single child, so I was the one who, if I wanted to explore, with being a single child. But if I got a PlayStation, I use that as a means to escape and enjoy it from that way. I also did read at times, but also I wasn't probably like most kids. I generally tended to read more so in primary school rather than when I went to high school. And I think that probably isn't too dissimilar to what we're experiencing now. In my work in just talking to students, I'll give you an example of a recent conversation I had with a Year 7 student. So I asked him, do you like reading?
He replies, no, not really. When was the last time you read a book? Probably grade 3, but I read books for class. What do you do in the afternoons or evenings? I train a few times a week and then compare the weekend. So for this person, they have a very keen interest in sport, and that's what they like to do. That's certainly a hobby. But what I can tell in terms of that brief interaction was that reading isn't a priority for him. He doesn't find enjoyment or hasn't found a way to enjoy it. And I guess my point below that is that if we're going into a swimming race and we're wanting to compete, we're going to train for that. And the same thing has to apply for reading as well. We're not just going to be automatically great readers and wake up one day and all the words on the page make sense to us. It is challenging, and it does take time and practice. Another example that I was talking to a year 8 boy, and this is what he said and how our interaction went. So I said to him, how often do you read? Well, I read a lot. What type of books do you like reading? Well, I read a lot of children's books to my sister. I said to him, well, your sister must really enjoy that. It's very lovely that you're doing that. How old is she? She's around 5 years old. Then I paused for a moment and said, what books do you like reading yourself? And he couldn't answer me. He wasn't sure. So he's getting that exposure to language still, but he's well surpassed that. And it's really great that he's modeling that behavior for his sister. But for him, what new language is he going to be exposed to? What dedication time is he giving to that pursuit of reading? And so one of the things that when it comes to reading, as I put a bit of a following here, is that reading with between siblings can be great. It sounds like it's a really pleasant experience in this case, but it can backfire. Each child is different. Each dynamic between siblings can be different, and we don't want to make reading where we're getting into biting, hitting, teasing, and then becomes unenjoyable. So it's just a bit of a word of caution with that one there. For me, apart from being an English teacher, reading is quite important to us, and it comes back to what Veronica said before. We want to make sure that we're trying to make sure that students have the opportunities to have those skills and that foundation so that they have success in the outside world. But there's trends that are happening nationally, there are trends happening internationally, so we're not quite alone with this. But in Australia, it says that researchers found that while 45% of Australian primary students enjoyed reading for pleasure, less than a quarter of high school students do. And that's common. There's a larger emphasis placed on the early development of language and literature at the primary age, because that's where they're learning all the building blocks. And we'll come back to how that changes in high school. In terms of what it looks like in terms of our NAPLAN data, is that some researchers have found that less than 1 in 5 students who are behind in Year 3 catch up and stay caught up. In fact, most students with early low performance are at risk of not meeting learning standards throughout their schooling with the support they currently get. And that places a very large task in high schools when we're encountered with that figure. And so schools are having to respond to that, and we're probably at a point where we're expecting students to be at a certain level of attainment, but then that's obviously different to what we expect on the ground. So it is quite important that we get to the root cause of that. The picture that you see here is my nephew. I'm known as Uncle Boogie. He won't be able to say Bon at this point, and so we were trying when he was first born, trying to think of a nickname to give myself for him. But then every time I saw him, I kept going Boogie. So Uncle Boogie stuck. I had a lot of books from my childhood when I was in the library, and they would seem collecting dust. So I gave them to my nephew. They're not there yet. Some of those ones are on his bookshelf. Are ones that his parents have brought. But this is probably what we would typically see at a young age. That They may have a pile of books somewhere in their room, somewhere in the house. They're reading, and for my nephew here, he's not really reading, but he's getting the concepts of print. So what he's doing is looking through the pages, looking at the pictures. Obviously, when they get to be a little bit older, they'll start tracking left and right. So there's that early development and association with what the books are. Obviously, the ones that are interactive will have a flip. He's getting those. So, in terms of what outcomes look like for him, it's really good at this point. But it's not going to make a difference if there's a lack of interest in reading once we get past primary school. Because, for my nephew, hypothetically, he may be one who disengages. He loves trucks, big truck fan, loves his monster trucks, loves sports as well. And so maybe he'll go down that path, but we'll see. My plan is to mold him and make sure he gets into physiotherapy, so when I get old, he can work on my knees and joints. There is a book that I read recently, and I'll share the title with you soon. But there is, in this point, and I've seen that some of you have students in year 7, and even if we're at the one point, that's fine too, but some of it is still going to apply for tonight. But some of the research is saying that we get to a point in this transition where it's defined as orphan responsibility. So for the parent, they're looking at teachers going, you're the ones who need to teach reading, and then us as teachers are thinking, well, hang on, so you as parents are having to issue reading with the child. And then we also have another term here called expired expectations. So this is when students get to a point of developing enough skill for themselves that they can read independently. And independently to varying degrees. But they get to a point where they don't place any further value on reading, and there's many reasons for that. The intended or unintended consequence that we get to is that the value of reading and the value of just reading for pleasure is inadvertently diminished. And so basically it's not one's fault. But that's the kind of point of tonight, is that the first chapter, pun intended, is that I will be trying to keep talking about this aspect as well. It's incredibly important for both of us as a school and as parents to make sure that this is one aspect that we're trying to be mindful of. I'm just going to talk a little bit about some of the tools that are accessible to students. So Micros has been is a school that's trialing this student dashboard, and what we have here is a sample. And so this is what students can look and access. They can see their attendance, they can see some of their school results, but I'm going to walk through what the PAT-R results look like and stand for, because it will give you an opportunity to have that discussion with your child. And if we haven't had conversations from you as parents to us as the inclusive education, we certainly can have that conversation further. So each year, students in grades 7 to 10 complete the test of what's called the Progressive Achievement Test in reading and mathematics. And the point about this is it's a standardized test. So this test is available to other schools and other students, and so they will get a measure. And what the PAT-R test is, it's looking at different things. Basically, it's looking at reading comprehension and how well you can read within time conditions. You'll see 2 lines here. The one in light blue with the dash is the national average for this student in this cohort. And then you have the bold line, which is the individual student's PAT score. And it is looking at 2022 to 2023. You can see that there's a large disparity between the two. And so I'm just going to unpack what that means. So when we look at that number of 122 or 110, that's what's called a scale score. So it's a numerical value given to a student whose achievement has been measured by the assessment. You're not meant to be an expert in terms of understanding what this data is, but it just gives you a bit of, insight into that. What I do with other systems at my end is I work on standards and percentiles. Percentiles range from typically 1 being the lowest to 99 being the highest. And so in this example, the scale score gets converted and has been awarded a percentile of 3. So what does that mean? Well, it means that that student scored higher than about 3% of the Year 8 students on that particular test at that particular time. In terms of the scale score of 1 being around 138, so that's roughly nearing what the national average will be. They're being placed, or someone who would be at the top of that bullet point would be placed at the 68th percentile, meaning that that student achieved better than 68% of same age peers. So there is quite a difference between the two. There are many reasons why someone has got the score that they did. Maybe they were sick. Maybe they woke up when feeling it that day. But it's probably more of a likely reason that in digging deeper into that test is that as they progress through each year, the content that they're reading becomes much more difficult, much more challenging. The questions that they're being asked of them become more challenging as well. So for this student, some answers weren't answered in the allocated time, which means that they would spend more time reading the early passages than the later passages. And it's probably as a result of the language being more complex and sophisticated, or maybe not being aware of what that language meant. When students find themselves in that moment, there's more emphasis on trying to decode and understand and guess what the meaning is. So that could be possibly a reason. The dashboard also gives you some insight, it gives the student insight into how they've progressed or how they've scored in that kind of results as well. So for this student here, we can see that there's different areas that are strong for them. Spelling, obviously looking at that particular strength, but reading, writing, there are some areas to work on there. So the students can also see and design goals around what areas that they are needing to focus on as well. The point of the dashboard is to have the intention is to try and empower them and give them that information so that they can at least take some, well, it's not just a matter of accountability, but they can design goals around and think about what the steps are going to be in terms of moving forward, and that's in collaboration with their teachers as well. Dan, did you want to mention anything more about the dashboard before I move on?
One is a trial. We're doing this part of BCE, so not all BCEs will have access to the dashboard. And I guess it's around us putting the data into the students' hands, because if they can identify where their gaps are, then we're likely to be able to address those gaps. But I guess we want to share that with families as well, because we want you to be able to have conversations with the students around their data and where they're sitting with their reading, their maths and things like that. So more will come out and more development. We'll look at further developing the skills of students and how they can read that data as well.
It's just around that coaching as well. So we're us working with students around setting goals and coaching through achieving those goals. So in terms of that student agency, students being able to identify this is what I need to work on in collaboration with their coach. These are the steps that I can take forward to progress forward with that, and then come up with strategies. And that's not working, then being able to adapt and coming up with new things. So in terms of that, taking responsibility, learning that student agency, that's where it's about.
Thank you, Brian. The easiest way to look at some of the ways in terms of reading or improving reading or the amount of reading is by breaking up into a simple equation. So if we have the reading volume in terms of we're reading a lot, and the reading frequency is how often we're reading, then it's going to have tangible benefits. So within some of the research, it's indicating that if we say just read anything, like that can be fine, but it's not getting to enough variety. And so comic books are generally an easy gateway in terms of getting young people to begin reading. obviously the visuals are main point of attraction with that, but it's not giving them the rich exposure to language. So there's nothing wrong with reading a book or reading a comic book, and there's nothing wrong with reading graphic novels. It's just that you have to monitor the frequency of doing so. There can be many reasons why there are, or students will read less. And we generally have the first one of time allocation availability. As students get older, they take casual jobs, they do things around the house, maybe they're looking after their siblings. There are many reasons for that. So that it's all dependent, I guess, on the family dynamic and the context, but more so it comes into time allocation. And I know that it's probably the phones, PlayStation, gaming, that is more intrusive. And so time allocation also becomes a preference of choice. And so when it comes to reading, what's easier cognitively? It's easier to watch a TV show or movie rather than maybe reading a book, particularly if you don't have the confidence or the skill in order to read that. So skill and choice, or preference choice, definitely, there's some of the reasons why there's a lack of volume. Skill deficits could be that they have weak vocabulary knowledge. Maybe there's been going from childhood. That's why maybe it's a bit of a slow development there. So reading books at an expected year level or age can be difficult. There can be limited access or choice to engage in books. Sometimes the students don't know how to pick a book. So we'll touch on that later. But access is maybe living in a remote area, not having access to a local library. Maybe there's other schools out there that they don't have a library, so then that can be a little bit challenging as well. There's also cognitive and physical factors, and we're not really going to touch on that tonight, but if you do want to talk more about that on a one-on-one, you certainly can with me. But there's attention or concentration difficulties that could lend itself to reading less as well. If you have a vision impairment, things are obviously going to be much more challenging in that degree. I put reading frequency in here as well because I think probably the first questions that we may ask ourselves is how much. And so some people may say an hour. I myself would find it very difficult to find time to read for an hour straight. I've got a 9-week-old puppy. He's jumping up and on me all the time. Likelihood of me running at the moment, very slim. We all have busy lives. We all have different demands placed on us. So there is no magic number. It's just a matter of deciding what would be an agreeable amount. It's like we're coming back to the point I said before. If we're going for a marathon, we could jump in there straight away and compete. Find it very difficult. So just a matter of again, consider your expectations when it comes to the amount of reading. Start small. But it's also a matter of finding the right time in order to read. And generally at night may be the best time, but it depends. Maybe that's not always the case because it's very chaotic and busy trying to get the kids washed and to bed, or maybe in the morning is when it's best for you as a family. There are many benefits to reading more frequently, and they're listed here, but for me, what I see is that students have their speed and fluency of reading is probably a big factor within that. It's taking longer to read, and they're not always able to get through the information what they need to get through. There's more time trying to pronounce and decode what the words are saying rather than reading swiftly, so it can sound a bit disjointed. So obviously there's lots of benefits. If you're reading more regularly, what the research is telling us is that they have the ability to recognize words more quickly. They're not spending so much time and power trying to figure out the clues within the text and what the words are saying with one another. It helps their ability in terms of understanding what they need to do for writing, and it also gives them greater confidence in terms of communicating. For us as adults, there's research around that. It allows us, or it's more preventative in terms of reading will lower our rates in terms of getting, say, Alzheimer's. So there's cognitive benefits for us, even as adults. There are many occasions where I will sit with a student and I will assess their sight word knowledge. And there are times where they find it very, very challenging. So the two words up there, courageous and atmospheric, there are occasions where I've seen students find it very challenging to break things up into syllables. So there's a skill deficit in that respect. But what generally happens is that they visually substitute words. So they may go with the base word of courage or atmosphere because it looks close enough, or that they may jumble the certain letters and sounds there. There's lists out there, say 600 sight words, 1,000 sight words, but these are words that we would expect to be quite common. Character, diagram, look, see. Those are the simple things. Once we start to get to some challenging words like this, hemorrhage, that's where some students find it particularly difficult because they haven't encountered that word before and they haven't been able to see what the sounds and letter relationships are with that. So to be an effective reader, in short, is that you have to have two things, which is you have to have the skill. So these are the building blocks that we've been taught to your sons and daughters in primary school, that they're able to see which is the noun, which is the verb. And look, I think even now people may struggle in terms of being able to recognise that, and that's fine. But there's other things there in terms of other knowledge that comes from there, which is the semantic knowledge. So where the pictures come in, interpreting that and making meaning from that. Or that you're, as I said before in that example, you're breaking down what the symbols are. But the will is probably the most important thing for us as well, because again, what research has shown is there's a lack of engagement when it comes to reading. So not only do we have explained expectations, but we have a term called literacy. And that again is also linked to that students have learned enough skill, what they perceive as being enough skill, and then they're able to read independently, but they're choosing actively, in some cases, not to read it. We also have reading stamina. I think technology in this age particularly is making things a bit more challenging for us. Is that we're used to flicking through things. Myself will admit that I do this too. And sometimes we're not always going to be committed to sitting still. So reading stamina is about the ability to maintain your attention and concentration. And the way that you get better reading stamina is by doing it more often. And for us, it's not that once we get to a point of being quite capable or perceiving that we've got enough skill, it's the end of the road. As students progress all the way through the schooling, is that they're going to be exposed to more complicated text. There's going to be different words that will come to them, particularly in subject-specific words. And when we get to biology and chemistry, there will be terms that they will have to use. They'll have to use that in different tenses. So it's certainly not the end of the road. There still can be a lot of work done in terms of making one to be a lifelong reader. So ways that you could potentially encourage your child to read more often is that the main thing that research says is by being a role model with that. And it's through doing this without too much force. So if you're taking time and you're reading yourself, then if your child is seeing that, they're going to transmitting that message without necessarily saying it. Like, you should read more. If you're coming in with, like, you need to read because it's going to help you with your academics, and you need to read so you can get a good job. What researchers say is that it doesn't work. So coming down from that angle is not always effective. But it's also important that you yourselves take time to find a book that you enjoy. My wife loves Bridgerton. I was forced to watch that. It's alright. It's not my bag. But if you have daughters, then maybe this is a gateway. So watching the show and then reading the book or listening to the audiobook. And for me, when I'm picking a book, I will stand in a bookshop for about half an hour, and until my wife gets in the room and wants me to leave. But to me, the one thing that works well is sampling. I have a particular style of what I like in a book. If it's more first person, where the characters are talking about themselves all the time, I generally am not interested. I tried reading The Wheel of Time. It's a fantasy book. There's also a TV show about that, and it's a very, very well written book. But it goes into a lot of description where there's endless paragraphs about one thing, and I couldn't sustain it. So I've tried 2 attempts, and I didn't stick with it. Maybe I'll have, on the 3rd strike it'll be fun, but we'll see. So sampling is maybe a great way, and that's a matter of to you. You may be looking at the first page, the first paragraph, the first chapter, and then you're getting a sense whether you like it or not. And I think we need to, if we're going with sampling, it's giving time for your sons and daughters to go through that themselves. They can also go through what's called a randomized approach. So I'll just pick anything off the shelf and I'll just grab it and go for it. If it's boring, I'll put it back and then I'll grab something else. But also something to pay attention to, because we don't want them to keep rifling through different books. Sometimes the books that you remember most are the ones that you dislike. There's color, title, and blurb. Those features in terms of font. Its color, the picture, can also be a feature that stands out to them. There are other ways that students can pick in terms of they latch onto a series. So back in when I was a child, a teenager, that Harry Potter was really big. So there was a movement there. Twilight is another example of a movement. And it became like a bit of a cultural aspect as well. So that's fine. That's great if they want to get hooked onto the latest series. But if they just stick to that in isolation, they can also deny themselves of different opportunities to read outside of that that little bubble that they're in. So again, trying to change the genres. So non-fiction or fiction is very great, but then they need to be doing something else. Reading the newspaper is fine, just as long as that's the only thing that they're not. If they're just reading the newspaper all the time, that's not necessarily going to be in their best interest. For me, I'm reading Jack Reacher at the moment. I watched the series and I loved it, and then I started reading the book. And for me, and what I found was preparing for tonight was that juxtapositions work really well. I grew up in an era that was focused on critical literacy. I was very focused on adaptations and differences between things. And so for me, when I'm looking through this, it's like, okay, I can see a bit of a difference between how the director has decided to go and portray Jack Reacher in this setting to how it's actually described in the book. So some slight differences there that I was able to pick up. But for me, I don't have a lot of friends who are wide readers, but I do have a couple. We're very focused on Jason Bourne. We love Jason Bourne. Anytime that we can latch onto say anything about Blackbriar, or anything to do with conspiracy theories, we'll have a good laugh about that. So for teenagers, while I was able to find my friends with that, sometimes they find people who are also like-minded like them. And when they have a book, they jump on to each other and they start sharing what we read. And that's really great. And then there are times where readings aren't cool and you're a nerd. And that's not the position that we're going to be taking. And so that's where they're probably going to be more reading it and with their home, seeing it from themselves, and maybe not really sharing that with their friends, and that's fine. But if they're doing that individual practice, it will certainly help. So some tips that have been recommended, and they're not what I read, again, it's coming from what researchers are saying, is that phones need to be away outside reach. You can't have any distractions with that. So the other point that I'm going to be making is that obviously if campus is rising, you'll get that pushback. It's inevitable, like if you're trying to implement this practice or reinstate this practice. So, you have to be mindful of that, picking your battles. But obviously, if there's arguments, it's getting quite heated. You don't want it to become an unenjoyable experience. Teenagers will be quick to point out double standard. So if there is a matter of that you have to find out, they'll quickly tell you to do so as well. When you're reading out to your child, maybe you're picking a book together and you're sharing things together, you do not have to be an expert. You do not have to be a person like you're doing in an audiobook. So if you make a mispronunciation or mistake, you're doing the right thing because the students are going to be seeing that vulnerability from you and are going to be self-correcting. Or develop their own self-confidence from that as well. In terms of positive encouragement, it's one of the best things that you can possibly do. So if they make a mistake, give that encouragement. We try, we attempt, but then ask them, can you take another look at this word here? And if they can't get it right, then that's when you can step in and possibly send it forward. There are obviously workarounds that you can use. You can use audiobooks as well. For me, I read the book and the audio and listen to the audiobook at the same time because I didn't have the opportunity to be read as a kid. I actually really enjoyed being read to even now as an adult. But what other people, what researchers say is that students felt or feel that parents have read or finished reading too early with them. So they really do enjoy that. That's what it's telling us. Something that I did back in 2019 was that, and was tried, was that I was put on to Stephen Fry, who wrote this book about what's called Mythos, which is about Greek mythology. His point, one of the reasons why I read the book was that there was this, in our culture today, there was that connection of telling stories, particularly like around fire, and that whole tradition of telling stories. So what I did was I had a glass of wine, not featured here, but I lit a fire, had a dog out the back, looked at the stars, and just listened to his audiobook. Very pleasant experience, and something that you might like to do as well with your family. So if you do happen to find an audiobook, there is a particular preference that you may have. I prefer certain tones and decimals with how people talk and how they read. So I'm a bit picky. You may be as well. But in terms of that shared experience that you could have, sitting back, just being quiet, just listening to being read to, you may find it to be beneficial as well. A couple of things that are available to students. So if they log into the library platform, then they can get access to Sora. So Sora is an app that allows them to read as well. There's nothing wrong with reading a book on a phone or an ebook. The main thing is that you're monitoring its use. If they haven't been particularly trustworthy with their phone device, maybe you want to stick with hard copy to begin with. So there's no real stance, I guess, on what we were saying in terms of what is book better than technology, and you and the child have to make that decision. But obviously, if you have a hard copy, equally it could be at the bottom of a school bag. So you have to make sure that one is working or the other. There's also some English tutorials as well at 7:45 to 8:25 in A5 as well, and they're on a Thursday. I have some resources here for the first two, reading, writing hotline, and watch or lost for words. They to anyone who feels that they need some support with their own literacy as being an adult. So those are some resources there. I do get a lot of questions around what book should my child read, and that's a very difficult question because we all have individual tastes and preferences. So the Penguin Random House and the City of Gold Coast, they're probably the best two in terms of answering the quizzes there and taking a look. The OneDrive app is something that my wife uses in terms of connecting her e-reader to different apps, and she's got the Gold Coast City Council app as well that she's able to borrow books for. Some of the points I've been talking about tonight with this reading come from Margaret Murger. She is a professor, I believe, is at university, and so her book, Reading Engagement for 20s and Teens, is a really great book. There are lots of points that were really interesting for me in reading this, and she has other research articles that are accessible as well. I did dash through the maths. And so with this one, there's a couple of things that is very evident from the research is that it is a matter of ensuring that you as parents are comfortable and not underselling your own knowledge. Sometimes at this point in school, as we're getting past year 6 and we're out of high school, is that things are obviously becoming harder. And so the main thing that's really being iterated within this is that you're not meant to be content masters. You don't need to know all the answers. And if you're invested and you want to help, sometimes you don't have the answers when you're trying to work through a problem. It can be very difficult and challenging because the child doesn't know and you're trying to help them and you butt heads. That's not the best way of going about it. But it's a matter of that you have at some point learned enough maths and you've learned different ways of maths. And there's times where I've had conversations with families that say the way that they teach maths now is different to when I was taught, and that seems very much the case. So there is some tips that will come. Some of the points that in here is this, which I really love, is recognize that you're probably better at maths than you think. Many parents recall a moment when maths seemed impossible. This can happen to good mathematicians too. So again, it's giving that confidence that you don't have to be that expert. That's where we have that collaborative relationship. In terms of strategies that do work well, it's coming from a supportive place. And so these are some of the things that I'll just run through and listen. So if you are encouraging study habits, is that there is a set plan that the student is following in the lead up to an exam, that would be beneficial. If you're looking at their working out, some may just rush to the answer and not show they're working out. And so it's a matter of encouraging them to go back and taking a look at that again. In this day and age, I think we want the answer right now. And so in maths, it's a bit more challenging because it is a process and there's lots of steps involved. So again, with that reassurance that it's okay, this is meant to be hard. Resist the temptation of identifying the mistakes. It's really easy to jump in and go, well, this is what you need to do. So just probably the next thing works really well is to get them to do and talk out loud about what the process is, what was their process. Even if they get it correct, you can still get them to articulate what the process is, because there is obviously a methodology to that. They also suggest that making mathematics fun and incorporating it into anything that you can do. There's some examples in these books where it's a matter of plotting different shapes with details and napkins. It can be creating a budget, opening a bank account, doing life skill-based maths. Can be very functional and also very useful for them. It's probably when it gets to homework that's where we sit down and we're trying to help them with that. And so some of the questions that are being presented here are probably one of the ones that you need to reference. Is that, what did you learn today? What was the maths idea that you're focusing on, this concept? What did you find most interesting? Or what was most challenging? Then what are the instructions saying in the question? What are the words, and if they're still not sure with that, well, what are the words telling you? Do they understand the language that's being presented to them? Do you know how to begin? If they don't, then it's a matter of referring back to examples within their textbook or the documents in their OneNote. Where are you getting stuck? Is there a way that we can look and help online? So if you frame things in terms of where can we look, where it's using those types of, where can we look, emphasis on that, it's not a matter of what do you need to do. You need to go ahead and look on that. So just be mindful of the language that you're using. These resources here are mostly from the States. And so there are resources obviously within Australia, but the ones that I put in here is trying to, I guess, make things or incorporating maths where it's maybe a family activity. I really like the material on the whole mathematics course because it gives some outlines to you as a parent as to what the skills are going to be, and gives some worksheets with that. So it's more something that is done outside a typical mathematics course at school. So you may find some things there. There is figure this, so there's some maths challenges there that the students may engage in if they're particularly interested in that. But look, I'd say that what we're looking at the moment, and more information will come, is in terms of the senior academic mentoring. So it's in the planning phase of this peer tutoring. So more information is going to be released about that. There's also mathematics tutorials on Thursday in the library from 3 to 4. And obviously it's a matter of working with your maths teacher and trying to develop that relationship there as well. I think just the last point I'll make here is that we also have Jeff here, who's one of our guidance counsellors. But for us, the support team, we have different support teachers in special education that work with across different year levels. And we have our email address there in case you need to reach out to us. So I hope that tonight has been somewhat useful in giving you some strategies to take back, think about being at home. It won't be easy, but if you try and persist and do it occasionally, I'm sure it may be beneficial. So thank you for your time tonight and listening if you're on the recording.